I was reading Greg Sankey quotes, SEC commissioner, about how he's like, yeah, house settlement, great. We need to be able to enforce NIL. Our coaches want rules. They want guidelines. You're saying, all right, the SEC is on board with this. The SEC is on board with stopping being able to just go out there with a money gun and pay whoever it is, however much that you want, and like money whip people. Wouldn't that really, really benefit the SEC? Well, wait, could this actually be, if the house settlement is really enforced stringently the way that they optimistically want to think it will be, could that actually be a very bad thing for the Big 12? I think we kind of talked on the other side of it last time, like, hey, if you're not BYU or Texas Tech, may well be a good thing that they won't be able to just money whip you from within the conference. But could this actually be bad for the Big 12 if it goes back to the world that we were in before, which is level playing field, at least above board monetarily? Because Dan Wetzel from ESPN says we probably do need to think further about this. That's the case that he made. All right, so look, the Texas Tech and BYU, that's almost kind of low-hanging fruit with the house settlement because it's so much easier to talk about here. Hey, they're the ones spending the most money. They're the ones with the deepest pockets in the conference. So stands to reason, if you get into an unlimited money that can be dished out sort of situation in perpetuity in college sports, yeah, BYU and Texas Tech stand to gain the most, and they would also stand to lose the most if this is actually able to be properly adjudicated by the letter of the law here and what's drawn up in the house settlement. They are in the news right now for just having landed the number one basketball recruit in the country, AJ DeBonsta, which certainly took multiple millions of dollars, and Texas Tech having a $40+ million football roster. Okay. I continue to say, a lot of people talking a big game about this, that it is going to stick and that potentially that could be bad news for BYU and Texas Tech. Here's a Brett Yormark quote to give you. Quote, "Our schools want rules and we are providing rules and we will be governed by those rules. If you break those rules, the ramifications will be punitive." So Brett Yormark is in lockstep and in line with what Greg Sankey had to say there. But if the rules, look, Brett Yormark's kind of a maverick of a guy, right? He's very, very sure of himself, kind of a maverick sort of personality. Well, if he's got Texas Tech and BYU and they can get out there and spend all their money, again, I can see why you'd say, wouldn't Brett Yormark want to be sort of on the side here of like, let the Mavericks go to work here. Let's shake up the system. I mean, Tech has that portal class. BYU signed the number one player in college basketball. Like, a lot of things are happening in college sports right now that indicate teams outside of the little club, little like 5 to 10 big brand club that typically kind of run everything. Teams are really starting to have some success outside of that they didn't before. Well, they didn't have the option to just go spend this money. So let me read to you a little bit from Dan Wetzel. He says, competitive balance actually leveled during the open NIL era. Certainly in football and men's basketball, where more teams from more places were capable of fielding national championship contenders. Talent, at least among the top 50 schools, spread out. Geography, blue blood history, and preferred shoe company status no longer seemed to matter as much. And it is an interesting point on, like, let's take the shoe company, right? We're in Big 12 country. We know about Kansas and the Adidas stuff and how Adidas was kind of helping funnel players there. I mean, regardless of what you think is how legal or not legal it was, I think we all understand that they played a really influential role in getting some talent there. Now it opens up and Kansas basketball has struggled. Like, they won their national championship right before NIL got totally crazy. It was out there a little bit, but it was not the Wild West that we're in right now. Once that happened, that dynamic has changed and Kansas is no longer running the Big 12. Now, I know many Kansas fans would look at me as the typical K-State fan that would be here to say, oh, well, I tell you what, all of a sudden everybody can pay players and look what happened to Kansas. Like, I think it's a little bit more nuanced than that. I think it's all of a sudden, if everybody else can pay a bunch of money and get in the game that way, it just introduces a whole new dynamic where you're having to manage money. And the transfer portal in particular has probably hurt Kansas more so than the money part of this. But it's just been a new dynamic. And Bill Self had the old dynamic figured out. It's been a new dynamic. Bill Self has not been able to figure it out. And it has created, I guess you could say, more parity in the Big 12, certainly a more interesting environment. in Big 12 basketball than what it was when Kansas was winning every single year. I get what Wetzel is saying in terms of football talent being a little bit more spread out. I mean, for a while there was Alabama, LSU, Clemson, Ohio State. Just every single year, one of those teams going to be winning the national championship. We did now get to a point where over the last 3 years, you've had Michigan, Washington, TCU, Notre Dame, all involved in national championship games. But, Michigan was the only one of those to win. Was it NIL that really made that difference there that got Michigan over the hump? I mean, they were, a blue blood, still kind of out of that national championship club before then. I don't know that I would argue that it was really like NIL that flipped the switch and made that big difference for them. But if you want to say that the general trend has been more teams have gotten in there, like, okay. But, Washington and TCU got their asses kicked when they did play for the national championship. But they did get in there. So, I will buy that it's maybe spread out the talent a little bit. That was a point that I was making back about particularly like Georgia. Looking at their season this year, it's harder to hoard a second and third string that would be as talented but again, the portal, NIL is a part of it, but the portal being something here. There is something too that NIL has spread out talent a little bit, and it's given some places the opportunity to do things that they otherwise wouldn't. I will reemphasize that point. I don't think anyone would say that 2015 Texas Tech, if the portal existed, would have been able to put together a number one portal class if they couldn't just throw as much money as they possibly could from oil booster billionaires to get that. And that's not a slam to Texas Tech. That is like anybody in the Big 12, but Texas Tech is the example because they've actually figured out how to do it here now. And so the argument basically is that, hey, if you take that away, you remove that opportunity from places like that, well, then it's just going to go back to tradition, facilities, under the table cash, like whoever's doling out the most of that, which is what college football was forever until the last 5 years. We're just going to go back to what it used to be. And talent will be a little bit less spread out. And that could decrease parity. And it could make it more difficult for teams in the Big 12 to really truly compete in the college football playoff or at the highest level. There's a legitimate argument to be made for that. There definitely is. I was thinking about it. I was like, so 10 years ago, you did feel like maybe if you wanted to try and spin it positively, you could say, well, 10 years ago, it did feel like K-State, Baylor, TCU made legitimate runs. Oklahoma State made legitimate runs at national championships and felt like they had a much more realistic chance. The problem now is that even if you go back to that system and you'd say, oh, well, back then it felt like they actually had a more realistic chance to win the title. The playoff has dramatically changed the calculus on all of that, right? So that has totally changed it. But I do think it's a fair point being made by Dan Wetzel here, and something that was worth diving into a little bit more, that this is a bit more complex than just hey, Texas Tech and BYU's futures are on the line. But it's more like, all right, the Big 12, if the Big 12 ADs get what they want, which is not having to worry quite as much about the money getting crazy out of control, does that actually then just still widen the gap between Big 10, SEC, and everybody else, which obviously includes the Big 12? Here's a little bit more. There were a couple quotes from Big 12 coaches, including Kelvin Sampson, in this article from Dan Wetzel, who said, if nothing else, much of it was out in the open. There were no more false caps, no more bagmen or cars in grandma's name or Adidas execs getting hauled off by the FBI. He's talking about the last couple of years with wide open NIL. Quote, I don't want it to get where they put it back under the table. Houston men's basketball coach Kelvin Sampson told ESPN, let's keep everything above. Let's keep everything on the table. I mean, that to me sounds like that's really kind of an argument for the current system as opposed to house settlement, Deloitte enforcement system, right? Because that's going to encourage, everybody seems to think, and I understand the logic, that encourages more under the table spending. Whereas right now, nobody has anything to be afraid of. So it is all out there in the open. It is totally out there in the open. Really, the point here is just that this is very complicated. It will take a lot to sort out. We're just going to have to watch not only what happens with lawsuits and what happens in Congress, but then once we have whatever those parameters are, we got to let it go play out and see how it will actually work in practice. you certainly got to think Big Ten SEC, like they're going to be pretty thirsty and desperate to do whatever it is that they can twist those into advantages, especially you think about the SEC. We've given them a lot of crap for what happened last year, but that's a year that they're not happy with as a conference. They're going to be fighting and scrapping and clawing and ready to do whatever it is that they can to bend the rules to their will, whatever they wind up being, and use them to their advantage. So I think it's not just BYU and Texas Tech fans that need to be watching closely. It is everybody.